Hi everyone, thanks for joining us today for our 30 on Thursday, 5 ways to improve your site's usability and accessibility. Just a little bit about Protiviti before we get started. Protiviti is a global consulting firm that helps companies solve problems in finance, technology, operations, governance, risk, and compliance. We have over 3,000 professionals in 70 offices in over 20 countries worldwide. Our 30 on Thursday webinar series is a bi-weekly 30-minute series where we talk all things SharePoint and enterprise content management. We have some great webinars coming up. If you're interested in registering for these webinars or to see our full schedule, you can visit our website ecm.protiviti.com/webinars. We are offering free 1-hour introductory consultations for our on-demand SharePoint support. Our SharePoint support team can perform anything from performance troubleshooting, system health checks, Nintex workflows, and business intelligence dashboards. If you're interested in our SharePoint support, email us at ecm@protiviti.com. We are doing live tweeting today during the presentation. Tweet us your questions and feedback during the webinar at Protiviti ECM and make sure to use the hashtag 30TUsability. Today's session is being recorded. You can access the recording of today's session with an archive of all of our past sessions on our YouTube channel. For questions during the presentation today, please use the question window in the GoToMeeting toolbar, or again, you can tweet us your questions using hashtag 30TUsability. We will be saving all the questions until after the presentation. Today's presenter is Maggie Swearingen, Experience Architect here at Protiviti, and I am Julia Marple, and I will be moderating today's session. So let's get started. Maggie, I'm going to hand over presenter rights to you, and you can take it from there.
Great, thanks. All right, let me know when we're good to go.
Looks good.
Great. All right, well, we have a lot to cover in the next few minutes here on this 30 on Thursday. These are two really, really big topics, and they certainly can't be fit into the next 25 minutes. But we're gonna touch on some high-level ways to start assessing the accessibility and usability of your site, and we're going to talk a little bit about why these things are so important and what they actually also improve in addition to just making your site generally more usable. But I think really the first thing to talk about is the difference between these two things. Accessibility is really a subset of usability. Usability is the ease of use of your site or your technology by anyone at all, regardless of disability. Accessibility means that someone with a disability can use your site. And I think it's really, really important to think very deeply about what disability actually means. For a lot of us, when we hear accessible website, our mind automatically goes to screen readers. But the definition of accessibility actually is incredibly broad. It covers not only people with blindness or people with hearing disabilities. It also covers people who have, extremities missing or may not have very deep cognitive abilities. So it is a very, very broad definition, and it's important to think deeply about what type of website you have and who your audiences are when you're deciding how accessible your site should actually be. But everybody should create a site that is usable. Usability is largely focused on effectiveness, efficiency, and satisfaction. And none of us want to design a website that doesn't meet those principles. So let's take a look really quickly at where you want to start with accessibility. So the first thing you're going to do is review the WCAG Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. These are an international standard for web content accessibility. There is a lot of information on this website, and there are a lot of guidelines. We're going to highlight a few of them today as they pertain to some of our other topics, but there's a lot of reading here and a lot of learning to do. What is important is to understand that accessibility is generally split into 3 levels: single A, double A, and triple A. Single A is a must support. You really have to, at a very minimum, to have a functioning website be at a single A level. Most of us these days are, but that is generally where a lot of websites sort of tend to fall off. The second level is double A, which is should support guidelines. So as you're reading through the guidelines and they have double A in the parentheses, this means this is something that you really should be doing because it makes your site more accessible. And then the third level is triple A, and this is the may support level. You know, if you are dealing with an audience that is particularly, that has a particular disability, you will want to be at the AAA level for certain guidelines to help your audience better use your site. For many organizations, just making sure that they are within reason at about the AA level is a really, really good target for most organizations. Since, like I said, not even most of us are there yet. It's not something that people give a lot of thought to during implementation. It's not until something happens that you tend to have to circle back and deal with it. And then what you're going to do is you're going to test your site. So there are a variety of tools that are available for testing, and we're actually going to take a look at one of them right here in a quick second. I do want to call out a note about 508 compliance. So a lot of times you hear the terms accessibility and 508 compliance and single A and double A and triple A all sort of mixed in and thrown in together. As I mentioned earlier, the WCAG guidelines are an international standard. 508 compliance is a standard in the United States, particularly targeted at organizations who are receiving federal funding. So the 508 compliance is based on the WCAG guidelines, but there are some slight differences in it. So again, it's more of a subset of the wider accessibility discussion, but the two things are not exactly the same thing, so I do want to note that here. Let's take a quick look at some of the tools that you can use to actually test your site. This WAVE tool is available. If you go to the WCAG website, there's actually a list of tools available. A variety of tools test very specific aspects of your site. So for example, if you just needed to test your editor on your site, your text editor, there is actually a special tool that will allow you to do that. There are also some more general tools. So I went ahead here and picked on Protiviti a little, and I ran our website, which I happen to know is being redesigned, so hopefully some of these things are being taken into consideration. But I ran our website through the WAVE evaluation tool. And what I really like about the WAVE evaluation tool is not only does it give you a nice summary over here, it also gives you details about your error messages. So for example, one of the big things that our site is missing is that we're not using H1 tags. And we'll talk about that in a little while because that actually is not just an accessibility issue, that's also an SEO issue. But here, not only can I hover over the error message, but I can also go and get more information. And I can learn why it matters and how to fix it. This is very, very important. A lot of these standards and guidelines can be fixed truly by content editors and by leveraging the content administration tools that are available in any good content management system. However, Some of them are very CSS heavy, and so they're things that would have to be focused on potentially more by a front-end developer or a developer to be handled appropriately. There are all things that need to be considered before you even implement a design. So for example, if we're looking up here, contrast is a big one, and we're going to talk about this in a second. But we have 142 contrast errors. And that just generally means that the text to background contrast is not strong enough in many areas, making people who are visually disabled unable to really distinguish the links. So these are fantastic tools that you can use. Another one that I like that gives similar reports is SortSite. It's actually a Power Mapper product. You can see right here I ran the exact same test on a sample of sites, and aside from privacy, we have a little bit of work to do here. SortSite also gives you some usability standards. So it not only gives you accessibility standards and tells you where you are with your accessibility for your single A, double A, and triple A, but it also gives you some usability standards. These tools are either very inexpensive or in some cases free, so they are fantastic to use. Like I mentioned earlier, there's tools for specific color testing. There's tools for your specific editors. This is the URL to the link for all of the tools. And there are 508 compliant specific tools, in particular the 508checker.com. Usability testing. So usability testing is a little bit different. Usability testing is based on tasks that you know you need your users to complete. Examples would be registering for an event, making a purchase, getting contact information. All of these things can be tested in generally 3 different ways. The first one is moderated and in-person. So a moderator is in a lab that is designed for this type of testing. There's microphones, there's recording, and the moderator reads the tasks and a user narrates what they're doing trying to solve the tasks. This is the most formal and the most traditional form of user testing. It still happens a lot, particularly in the e-commerce industry. The second way is moderated and remote. Very, very similar, although the 2 parties aren't in the same room, they're not in a lab. You might leverage a WebEx or a GoToMeeting for these. But you still have a moderator on the phone, the participant is still narrating what they're doing, and you're still recording the screen. The last way is unmoderated remote. And this is very, very interesting. People are using this a lot these days. Some tools that are available are usertesting.com, UserZoom, or something called Loop 11. All of them generally work about the same way. You put in your tasks ahead of time, and then your users can go ahead and complete the tasks. You can record them completing the tasks. You can ask them to narrate or not. Some of them provide very in-depth data afterward when users abandon tasks, for example. Usertesting.com I marked with an asterisk there because that actually you can get testers who are not necessarily part of your audience. So there are people around the country who will just volunteer to be testers, and based on certain demographics that you as somebody who's looking for a tester put into the system, they can respond and pick up and take the test. There are benefits and negatives to this, obviously. One benefit is that it's a really fast way to get some users to test your site. A negative is that they're probably not exactly your target audience most of the time. So, you know, there are special cases for when you would do this. And we're going to actually take a quick look at one of those right now, just so you can see an example of the type of response you get, particularly from user testing. This is an example that we did for a client, a potential client actually, a few weeks ago, just some very, very basic tasks. You can see in this example in particular, I actually requested that the users did the test on a mobile device because I really wanted to learn more about how the site responded to a mobile device. So we'll just listen to a short little snippet of this so you can get an idea of how this works. All right, so you get the idea there. You can learn so much about how a user interacts with your site. Something that I found very, very interesting from doing this user testing was that both users, both on a desktop and on a mobile device, used the fat footer more than they actually used the site navigation. And if you really looked at it, you realize that the fat footer was a lot more informative than the actual site navigation was. So they were more easily able to get where they needed to go quicker by using the more informative fat footer. So it's things like that that you might not think about that you learn really, really quickly. Also, there was a mobile version of that site. It took about 10 seconds for the tester to actually flip to the full desktop version on her phone, which wasn't responsive, as you noticed, because the mobile version simply didn't have all the functionality, and it didn't actually work for her. All right, so let's talk a little bit here about why design matters, and it does matter. Design matters because of contrast. There is a minimum contrast ratio that is required for the AA level of accessibility. It's a 4.5 to 1 ratio. You can see here I ran a quick design color test on Protiviti's site using one of those tools that I mentioned earlier, and it doesn't do very well unless you're using a lot of white. Usually the whites or the darker grays seem to pass. Once you enlarge your text or make it bold, we actually had a few more passes. As you are looking at your creative design, even prior to implementation, this is something that you want to start to think about. These tools allow you to put in all of your color codes and compare them so that you can very easily make sure that you have enough contrast in your site if meeting this standard is something that you are trying to do. Design also matters just at a fundamental level. From a usability standpoint, it matters. It can enhance navigation. You can see in this example here, the site navigation is very clear and very obvious, and it's clean. You can use white space to promote content effectively and to make content more clear to users. Users benefit from white space, and white space is something that comes with design technique. With regard to SEO and accessibility, there are a variety of requirements that actually will help you improve both. So even if making your site accessible is not necessarily something that is a priority for your organization at a given time, making your site optimized for search engines almost always is. The way these guidelines are written actually will benefit both. So by becoming more accessible, you're also optimizing your site for search engines. A couple examples, requirements 141 and 130, both talk about organizing your pages using headings and descriptive headings. That includes using heading tags, the H1, the H2, the H3. Those are best practices. Anyway, a good front-end developer will be using effective CSS that will use those tags. But even a content editor, think about when you're editing content in your WYSIWYG editor, and instead of using an H1 or an H2 or an H3, you decide to just go ahead and change the font to Arial 12 point. That is actually more detrimental to your site from an SEO standpoint and from an accessibility standpoint. Something else that's really simple that you can do is provide breadcrumbs. Breadcrumbs are great for SEO because they provide a tunnel into deeper site pages. Not every page on a site shows up in a navigation anymore, typically, but if you have a breadcrumb, that search engine can actually follow that path and it will help elevate your content. From an accessibility standpoint, it offers an alternative navigation method for a user and gives them context for related pages around the page that they're on. And there's a variety, there's many more of these requirements that sort of elevate SEO but also help accessibility. I just wanted to point out a few right here for us now so that you can really see the benefits of even just doing some of these simple things. For example, G91, provide text that describes the purpose of links. Almost every single content editing system will allow you to do this. Most of us as content editors don't actually fill out this field. If you just take a few extra seconds and fill out this field, not only are you making your site more accessible, you're elevating it in search results. Let's take a quick moment to talk a little bit about mobile devices. There's a lot that we can talk about with mobile devices. But from a usability standpoint, there are a few things to really consider. One is how users hold these devices. And you can see in this graphic here, we're talking about a standard user with a standard size phone swiping with their thumb. There are places where it is very hard for these people to get. One you'll notice is the upper left corner. Traditionally, however, that's where a lot of our menus end up in mobile design. So that's something to think about is, yes, that seems to be a standard pattern. However, it's actually really hard for somebody to get to without potentially using their other hand. Not so much maybe on a tablet where they're using two hands generally anyway. So where you're placing high-touch, actionable items in your responsive design or in your mobile application are important to think about. Also using standard mobile patterns. The hamburger menu is a relatively accepted mobile pattern today, but there are still people who don't understand that 3 lines will pop out a menu. A couple ways that you can fix that are by actually using the text menu under the hamburger icon, or just use the word menu instead. Both of those ways of handling it have tested very well amongst users, but everybody pretty much understands that whole family of navigation as a mobile device construct now. So in many cases, temper creativity when you are thinking about mobile usability and stick with conventional patterns because your site is going to be more effective in the long run. Swiping is another conventional pattern. People swipe right to left or left to right. Whichever way, you know what I'm talking about. Keep with that pattern. Don't change the swiping. Search consistency, how you are showing search on your site. Again, magnifying glass signifies search these days. And there are a few different conventions. Sometimes you click the magnifying glass and a search box pops down. Sometimes you click a magnifying glass and a search box pops out, whatever the case may be, but don't put search in the bottom of the page. It's not in the bottom of the page on a desktop. Why would it be in the bottom of the page on a mobile? So always consider consistency and patterns in your mobile design. This URL is a little tool here. You can just go ahead and put in your site, and the Google Webmaster Tools will tell you how web-friendly it really is. I put in Protiviti site this afternoon, and it pretty much failed on all accounts. But I put in another responsive design site for a client that we did recently, and it passed with flying colors. So you get an idea of really how mobile-friendly your site is just by using this little tool, and then you can make tweaks accordingly. Accessibility on mobile devices. So it's important to understand that there are not separate standards for accessibility on mobile devices. Generally, the WCAG standards apply to mobile devices too. So when they say that you should have a description for a link, you should have a description for a link in your mobile site just the same. Having a responsive site does help this. Because for most of us, any inputs into our regular site or our regular content administration system are going to maintain as we have a responsive website. If you have a separate mobile site or a separate mobile app, you would have to look at these things separately. Generally speaking, mobile browsers that follow the UAAG 2.0 standard are just natively going to be more accessible. So as you're looking at your mobile devices and mobile devices that your users are using, it's important to take a look at browsers. For the most part, all modern browsers are going to fall under this category. But if you're using, some obscure technology, it might be something that you'll want to take a look at. Some other things that are really, really important when it comes to accessibility on mobile devices. Something that's made a little bit easier for us is size in many cases. If you have a responsive website, you should be sure that you're responding it down, but that your text sizes are maintaining, and that you have the ability for users to continue to zoom in. On iOS devices, this is pretty standard. On most mobile devices, this is pretty standard. That's something that really actually helps us from a usability standpoint. Contrast. So you have to remember, not only is contrast important on a desktop, and you saw how those colors largely failed in a few slides ago, contrast is really important on a mobile device because often people are outside. They're in the sun, so even when you could see something before and you're visually impaired in some way and you can't see, you may not at all be able to see it if you're outside on your mobile device, so something to think about. And keyboard availability. A lot of accessibility tenets really require that users can somehow use a keyboard with the mobile device. In many cases, this is completely possible through USB and a variety of other tools, but just make sure that actions that you're requiring on the mobile device can be completed via a keyboard and not necessarily a touch, because touching is a potential disability. Someone might not be able to do that because of a variety of reasons. Really quickly here, as we're running out, we have about 1 more minute left. Some guidelines for media-heavy sites. So Accessibility Guideline 1.2 really covers this. If you have a site with a lot of media on it, there are 2 big things that you're going to have to do. You're going to have transcripts, and in some cases even look at closed captioning. So those are big considerations. Transcripts are challenging. They are very, very difficult to have. There are tools out there that will help you with that. One potential tool that actually also helps video on SharePoint sites is called RAMP. And they will help you provide transcripts of your videos. So that might be something that you need to look at if you have a media-heavy site. Also, use the HTML5 current video standards. That is going to just generally elevate the accessibility and the usability of your site. Older video technologies, the Flash, the Silverlight, those are going away. HTML5 is truly the standard, and when HTML6 arrives officially someday, there's a lot of potential to bring in some other tools, and particularly with regard to adaptive and streaming video. So that was a lot of information in 25 minutes, a lot of tools you can use and a lot of action that you can take even right now going back to your computer. Protiviti does offer a usability assessment. That usability assessment includes virtual usability testing for a number of users, a site review and recommendations, and an accessibility report and recommendations. And you can contact me directly and I can help you with that if that's something that you're interested in coordinating for your organization. So thank you so much for attending today's session. I'll turn it back over to you, Julia.
Thanks. I just want to address one of the questions here. It's kind of long, so kind of follow with me here, Maggie. Have you seen examples where organizations have used unmoderated remote testing tools to test how individuals with disabilities navigate their site in conjunction with other accessibility technologies? In other words, have you seen testing platforms that work well if a tester is using something like JAWS?
Yes, there are some platforms out there that are specially designed for this. If the person who asked this question, if you can give Julia your information, I will contact you directly. I have to go back through some files and get the names of those programs, but there are absolutely tools that facilitate just that need.
Okay, great. Yeah, I have her information, so I'll hand it over to you, Maggie, after the presentation.
Perfect.
Okay, the recording of today's presentation will be on our YouTube channel if you guys would like to re-watch all the great information that Maggie presented today. We did actually just have a question come through. Do you have any recommendations to enhance usability within SharePoint for team collaboration and document storage?
Well, that's probably another session completely.
Right.
Actually, to be very honest, I think particularly with some of the changes that are coming down the pike in SharePoint 2016, Microsoft is doing a lot of that. One of the things, one of the reasons we used to come in and make SharePoint not look like SharePoint was because it wasn't intuitive and it wasn't usable. Buttons were in places that you didn't think that they would be. Calls to action were very small in many cases and you would miss them. A lot of that is changing in the new user interfaces, and I expect actual usability of SharePoint to be significantly improved based on some of these changes that are coming down, because they are following a lot of tenets of usability. Calls to action are much larger. There's contrasting color. User interfaces are simplified for users, so there's not a lot for a user to absorb before they actually have to take action, which is good. SharePoint 2007, I don't think anybody could have said that about it. So, I mean, that's a really short answer to a very complex question, but over time, I think SharePoint itself is actually evolving to become more usable based on a lot of the pushback in the past decade about its actual usability.
Okay, great. That is all the questions we had today. We have a lot of great feedback too in our chat window, so thank you all for complimenting Maggie's presentation. Thanks, Maggie, for presenting today. It was a lot of great information. Again, our recording will be on our YouTube channel by the end of today. Thank you all for attending, and we will see you in June. Have a great day.
Thank you.